Good evening. Welcome to ACE. My name is Greg. I oversee events and partnerships for Ace Hotel. This night is about a year in the making. Our founder, Alex, met Bob Gruen at a party a little bit over a year, less than a year ago. He was a big admirer and said he wanted to do a show with him. Alex obviously passed away, but we kept the dream alive with the help of Smutty over here, who many of you know. And next week in London, we'll be staging Bob's first show in 10 years in Shoreditch. So if any of you are in London next week, come out to it. But we thought that we would maybe do a little something special as part of the LDNY festival, which is going on right now, which is between the two mayors of London and New York as sister cities. So we thought we'd do something pretty New York. And we asked Mick to come up and have a conversation with Bob, which seemed like a good idea, but they said they probably needed a little bit of prompting, so we got Legs to kind of push it along. So, into the river. Yes, we need a little bit of youth. There's not much more I can say. I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight. There's going to be Q&A afterwards, and there's going to be a dance party by our friend Howie, who is out here. Yeah. I'm going to bring up Legs first to kind of set the stage, and then Mick and Bob. Thanks for coming out.
Could you turn that chair around? Excuse me. I don't want to play fucking director. Yes. It needs to be back a bit. Back a bit.
Now you see how this night is going to go.
Chair, but I don't want to be more forward than Bob. Put it back. Because we.
Not a photo shoot.
Yeah, exactly.
How many photographers did it take to enter like that?
Thanks for coming out tonight.
Sorry.
Thanks for coming out tonight to see the great Mick Rock and the great Bob Gruen, who are two of my favorite photographers. And I'm going to ask them some really good questions that I actually want to know the answers to. So I think this is going to be kind of fun. So if you please help me welcome Mr. Bob Gruen and Mr. Mick Rock.
I remember him from the old days. You know that, Bob? I do remember him well.
Hasn't changed much.
A little bit more sleep, Bob. Come on.
My hair's gotten
Couldn't have
so
had
much
less.
thicker.
Yeah, we all have. Well, we've all got a bit thicker.
Don't these guys
'cause we're
look
older.
great? I mean, they're about 80 years old each. I knew these guys when I was hanging out at CBGB's in the 70s. And Bob used to have a little motor scooter and a jean jacket and a big afro.
Much bigger.
And Mick Rock would come in and mumble it with his mouth full of marbles, and you wouldn't understand.
That's
a
an
fucking-
I told
English
you, it's mothballs. We don't do marbles.
That's an English accent.
It's what?
It's mothballs. It's
Mothballs. Mothballs. Even
Yeah, you put 'em in
mothballs
your
doesn't
clothes.
come out that right. But first of all, I want to ask you guys. You guys started off your careers by shooting your roommates, and now Mick, your roommate was.
Well, no, in that sense, it's true. However, what got started with me was some LSD, to be quite honest with you. I picked up a friend's camera on an acid trip. I was with this young lady who was blonde, not totally unlike my wife, in fact, in certain ways, now I think about it. So it was a presage, I suspect. Anyway, picked up the camera and started banging away with the camera. And, there was no film. But anyway, next time I did I put some film in. But Sid Barrett is what you're trying to get.
Yeah.
Yes.
Get to the point, Mick.
Yes.
These people have things to do and places to go.
Yeah.
So you were roommates with Sid Barrett. Were you living
Yeah.
with him?
Oh, I did. You can't say is it totally, but I wasn't. I was briefly a roommate with him in London, and after I'd left Cambridge and he had left Floyd.
Now, did Sid leave the toothpaste top off the toothpaste, or did you yell at him?
Oh, there's a lot of innuendo in there.
No,
Is
there's
not?
none. There's absolutely
no,
none.
I think there is. There's overtones of something. We were friends, darling. No, but we did take LSD together about I mean, I can't swear to the day, probably about a month before I actually did those Madcap pictures, yes.
Before we go to Bob, I just want to interject something
fucking
here.
time, Jack.
About LSD, and I'm doing a book on the 60s now, and I just interviewed the guy, his name is Lawrence Schwartz, and he was the guy that turned Brian Wilson onto acid for the first time. And if you don't know, California Girls was written as Brian was coming down from acid. So I think acid will probably play a little bit of a role in this.
It can
Bob.
be an inspiration.
So you were hanging out with Glitter House.
Yeah, well, it was a band that actually formed when I first moved in the city onto Sullivan Street in the West Village. They were called the Justice League. Every time they changed drummers, they would get a new name, and by the time, like around 68, they were called the Glitter House. They broke up, and then the piano player got one last gig, and it was $75. So that was more money than they ever made, so they got back together for the one gig. They were discovered by Bob Crew at the party. Bob Crew he was a genius producer, actually Phil Spector's idol. He produced more than 80 top 10 hit singles, including the Four Seasons. He just passed away about 2 weeks ago. But he was my entry into the music business.
But you
You're like fucking Andrew Lou Goldham, my dear friend, on his radio show. You get the whole fucking background. From me, it will not be so intelligent, you see. Well, that's what going to Cambridge University did for me, I'm afraid.
Andrew also was a big admirer of Bob Crew and a good friend.
Oh, he talked about... I didn't know who he was when I first met Andrew in the late 70s, but he was one of his great heroes. And he was gay as a nine-bob note, and I think that added to part of the thrill, especially in that period.
Well, in that period, he actually always had models with him bearding. Like, people didn't really know he was gay. That was kind of...
Andrew did.
It came out later. Well, Andrew did.
Andrew knew he was.
I knew.
Bob, can you take us up to, you're hanging out with Buffalo Springfield, and you run into a female photographer, blonde.
Oh, Linda. Yeah, actually, I wasn't hanging out with Buffalo Springfield. Buffalo Springfield was my favorite band.
Right.
And then one day I decided to go with my girlfriend to visit a friend of hers in Boston. And I was going to sell a couple nickel bags to try to pay for the trip, which didn't work out at all. I didn't sell anything. But on the plane, we ran into Linda Eastman, who later became Linda McCartney. And she, at that time, was the official photographer for the Fillmore. I saw her on the plane showing some of her pictures. And I hadn't taken any pictures for any magazines yet. But I was interested. I was kind of jealous. Like, she was the official photographer. And she had just spent a week photographing The Who in New York and was on her way to Boston to shack up with Stephen Stills, who was playing that night with Buffalo Springfield. And so when she told me that, I said, wow, we'd love to come. And she said, oh, great. She was exhausted. She said, if I drove her car, then we could go to the gig with her. And I said, well, I'll drive the car, sure. So we went to the motel. She called the band to tell them we were coming, and they said, don't bother. There's no second show. We're not getting paid. And they basically came back to the motel and called their manager and said that they hadn't been paid. The tour was a failure. They were coming home. And I basically watched the Buffalo Springfield break up. That was one of my first experiences in the music business. And then we smoked a joint, and then I thought they would buy some of my pot, but they had no money. So I ended up giving it to them. I remember going down the hall and seeing some groupies that was really kind of surprising because they were fat, pimply, had ripped up stockings, and I thought, like, this doesn't look at all like the movie. Like, this is what the girls really look like. And then the girls went into their room, so I left so that they could be with them. And one by one, they all snuck out and came back to my room to get away from the girls and back to smoke a joint.
I'd like to move on to...
I'm going to have to step up to the plate, I think. That's a lot of fucking... I'm a bit flaccid, really, aren't I? In a manner of speaking, if you don't mind, Susie Ronson.
I'd like to move on now to a topic that you guys have captured so magnificently. And that is, and I was wondering if any of us thought about this at the time. And I'm talking about photos capturing a moment in time. When I think of Mick Rock, I think of the color stuff he did. And I was just in a hotel in LA, and there was Mick Rock's photos in the hotel. It was like Lou Reed. And what I wanted to ask you about was, did you know at the time when you were photographing Lou and David Bowie and Iggy when they were in London, that this was a magic moment and it would be considered like a period of time in their careers?
Well, obviously I smelled a big fat rat because there were no other photographers at the Raw Power gig. There were no other photographers at the Transformer gig. There were no other photographers in the room when I shot the shot that I used to call the Terrible Trio, and later on, as they matured, I called the Unholy Trinity. And so I didn't really... And Miss Ronson was there. You do recall, darling, don't you? Yes. So I don't know. I can't... You've got to remember the times.
Why was it...
I know you were a little bit young at that actual time.
Very
exactly.
young.
So I'm telling you, and I'm talking about London at that moment rather than New York, obviously, because I didn't know New York. I'd only been here once.
Why weren't there any photographers at any of those
Because they hadn't really surfaced. Neither of them had made Transformer, obviously, was huge and key for Lou. Raw Power, in fact, as Iggy told me in later years, he said, 3 months after it was released, it was in the 50 cent
But
bin.
huge in those days means all the college kids knew about him. It wasn't really radio play. I mean,
There was no
hit singles.
It's My Wife and It's My Life. No, they took a big pass on that. And
Iggy told me that his early fans was kind of like early Christianity. They had mental problems, physical problems, every kind of problem that they could have.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I want to be your fucking dog.
Acne
and it's
problems,
1969.
sexual problems.
But 1969, I want to be your dog. The things clash so heavily that's why they couldn't give their records away.
It almost seems incomprehensible that Iggy could do a song called "I Want to Be Your Dog" in 1969. If anyone was alive in '69, I mean, it was so ahead of its time. And going back to my question, Bob, when you were taking pictures of the Ramones, the black and white photos of them with their guitars in shopping bags, did you know that you were capturing a little bit more?
There was an expression in those days which was very common, and it was no commercial potential. And most of the bands that played at CBGB's had no commercial potential. That was the assumption, that this was something downtown people were having fun with, but no, we didn't expect it to go around the world.
But if it had, you wouldn't want it to have commercial potential, because that would fuck up the whole mystique.
Well, that was the point, was to make something new and unusual.
Bob, I remember
exactly.
you coming back from photo jobs when you were actually photos that Bob was actually getting paid for. And
sometimes.
I would ask him where. I remember one time you came back from shooting Black Oak, Arkansas.
Oh yeah.
In the middle of the middle of godforsaken United States.
San Francisco, I think.
Yeah. And those were what were paying your rent. Now the photos that you're selling now of the Ramones and
I don't sell very many Black Oak pictures.
Can't give them away. No,
you don't
I have
sell
a lot
many
of
black
those.
and white pictures?
No, Black Oak, Arkansas pictures.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. No, sorry. But go on.
CBGB was more my hobby. I would actually pay the rent by going to Madison Square Garden for record companies doing Chicago, ELO, Boston, all these kind of bands. But I couldn't wait till midnight when it was over and I could get down to CBGB's. People used to play late back then. There was 2 shows a night, and there was one that would start around 8, and the second show would start around 1 in the morning. So you could come in and see 3 bands before 4 o'clock. And that's where I had fun, was downtown. But yeah, I worked at Madison Square Garden.
I remember.
No, the better class of girls were
What do you
downtown.
remember? You were
I can tell you that.
Well, I don't remember, which is what's so great about it. Mick, I'd like
Better
to...
class of girls were downtown. That's why you was downtown.
Yes, I remember.
That's
That
why
part
you
he
were down.
remembers.
That was why it was the only part of
Right.
New York that interested me.
Yeah. Mick, I'd like to ask you, you guys have shot a lot of the same people. You both shot Blondie, you both shot a little bit of Ramones, you both shot Clash. Didn't you?
No, I didn't shoot.
The Clash.
He's got, interesting enough, he has, oh, you want this in my mouth? He has, his big collections are different from my big collections, but we do have a bit of crossover in the middle. I'm sure we both shot Ozzy Osbourne, much to people's surprise. Of course, he looks like a
But
big
we were never
puppy
in competition. Our work is very different. And Mick did a lot of studio work, whereas I was doing a lot more live work. And I was out and about shooting every band there was for Rock Scene magazine.
Oh yeah. But after a while, I mean, early on, I got everything because I didn't have a fucking studio to work in. But once I did that Bowie sax session, even though I did it and I kept shooting live and other stuff, I wanted to shoot that, and then I did the Queen and then Roxy and all this stuff, you know. So, when I was in New York, I did shoot some stuff at CBGB's, and I've got, actually I do have the Ramones, all 4 of them, the original Ramones, but I shot a lot of studio, people like Talking Heads and Lou and Blondie and,
I'd like to ask
and the
you,
Ramones.
since you guys have shot stuff, and you were never in competition, I know that because I was there, and you guys were friendly, always friendly.
We were too stoned. We were in competition.
But what I'd like to ask you is, do you have favorite pictures that Bob took of people like Blondie?
I do. I love the one of her sitting in the back of the car because I like the colour. I like the colour.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the black and white, but that's the one that I like best, and I suppose it's because of the colour. Not that I haven't shot. Oh well, of course. Yeah. This is a little bit different. I mean, you get my. I have a huge collection of kabuki theatre photographs shot both in New York and in Tokyo, and also had and shot them backstage in rehearsal, portraits, getting dressed. Got this huge, and I did a big show there a few years ago. Because after I'd done this big exhibition in 2003 at the Metropolitan, what did you call it? Metropolitan Museum. Museum. That's when I first saw, what's that word museum hanging around me for? And of photography. And they wanted to know what I wanted to do afterwards. And I said, I want to fucking shoot kabuki without the fucking, because they don't really understand that word. Well, some of them do.
Well, thank you for that, Mick. Bob, I'd like to ask you the same question. Do you have any favorite photos?
Let's get back to the
Mick's?
serious shit.
Well, there's a nice one he took of me that I like a lot.
Come on, Bob.
And well, yeah, I like all the sexy pictures. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you like the saucy ones, right? Yeah.
Is
They're
there
my
a picture?
favourite.
Is there a picture that Mick has gotten that you've said, "Oh man, he really got that guy"?
I mean, listen, I have to tell you, I know when I hit the knowledge that T-shirt on John Lennon, he'd fucking stolen from Bob right in front of him, I went, fucking, that's as close to fucking genius as you can get, Bob. You know, I mean, what can you say? The existential factor. It's very, you can't even talk about it you can't fucking intellectualize about this fucking shit, but you know it when you see it. I have always known it when I saw it.
Speaking of the famous John, of course, everyone's familiar with Bob Gruen's very famous photo of John Lennon in the New York City T-shirt, and a lot of people have kind of appropriated that image and they sell it on the street.
No, they stole it.
They
fucking stole it.
They stole it.
Don't fuck around.
They stole it.
And on the internet, it's called shared.
Yeah.
No, Darby, it's called every time I see it, I weep a little more for your pocketbook.
Me too.
But I said, Bob, doesn't that upset you? And he says, no. And I thought this was such a great answer for such an iconic photo that's been, reproduced without paying Bob any royalties on it for years.
He's got
and
a couple
years.
here and there.
Well, he's got some royalties.
Sometimes.
It's not completely devoid of royalties.
But Bob told me that he went out and actually bought them on the street and gave them to friends, and I thought that was kind of a marvelous.
Well, they make them cheaper than I do in a frame and everything for $10. And they frame it up with the Imagine Circle. They're nice little pieces. But what I said was that I'm lucky that I took something that's worth stealing. That I made something that people like so much that it's going around the world. And part of the price is that people will take it.
Imagine if you'd taken that Che Guevara shot, though. That's the other one. The fucking everybody. Wow.
But that guy's a communist. He didn't care.
No, but that's when I knew communism definitely didn't work when I heard about him. I thought the motherfucker's never gotten a penny for that. The interesting thing about it, too, is it's a crop. It's actually a lateral shot, and they shake the head out of the middle. And it is an amazing... I mean, he looks so fucking extraordinary. Those shots, I think that is very like that. I think your John Lennon shot. I think there's something about my out-of-focus Transformer shot, because that came to represent, like, I don't know what you call it, degenerate rock, or, the... What?
Degenerate rock? Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Let's hear it for degenerate rock and roll.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what appealed to you, wasn't it?
Yes.
When you showed up, yeah.
Yes. Still does. Anyway, back to the subject. Exactly. You guys both, I don't think people know this, both of you guys were early experimenters in the whole music video genre, though we didn't call it music videos yet.
Pioneers.
Yeah, it was before there was a use for it. Before there was a cable show or any place that they could show those videos. I remember that was one of the frustrating parts. We were making video, but there was no place to show it. You know.
But why don't you talk a little bit? I remember Sony, the big music, or not before music, when they were just videotape. They gave you a deck, and you.
No, they didn't give it to me. I spent $1,700. I talked my dad into buying it, which was a hell of a lot of money in 1970.
Where did you steal that money, Bob?
Yeah, no, I got it from my dad.
Yeah.
But in 1970, that was a lot of money. But I convinced him that video was something of the future, that it was going to matter.
Did you pay him back?
No. But I earned it back, actually, eventually. But yeah, it was a box. It was a reel-to-reel tape recorder with half-inch tape. It was a big 40-pound box you carried with a camera that was about a foot long. I mean, seeing people walk around with cell phones that do high-def stereo recording is just fascinating to me, because this was black and white, mono, didn't work very well in the dark, and yet it was a modern miracle.
And who you were shooting then was the New York Dolls.
Well,
Can you talk a bit
first
about
actually,
that?
my big break into the business actually was one night I met Ike Turner. We went to an Ike and Tina show, and I had taken a couple of pictures a few days earlier, and I brought him to show my friends. And as we were walking out, Ike was going from one dressing room to another, and my friend literally pushed me in front of Ike and said, "Show Ike the pictures." And he liked the pictures, and I started taking more pictures for them and traveling with them. So the first group I videotaped was Ike and Tina Turner. And Tina liked it because we could tape a show and then go back to the hotel room and show it immediately, which was a modern miracle, because before that, if you filmed something, you had to get it processed, you had to get a projector, you had to get a screening room. This way, we could just film a show and go back, and literally less than an hour after the show, they were watching it, and Tina could point out, how the Ikettes could improve the act and so on. And actually, we've just released a DVD called Ike and Tina Turner on the Road, 1971-72. It's a great compilation of those tapes.
Well, mine was was less experimental, to the extent that it was old-fashioned 16mm film.
This is with David Bowie.
Yeah, you obviously talk about the other ones.
Yeah, well, you need to say.
No one wants to talk about, but the Bowie one. Yeah, well, David, because I was running around with David from the march. Well, from the march, because this was already. Oh, sorry about. But it was John O'Malley dancing, and it was just before these rainbow gigs he did with Lindsay Kemp, when that was the most theatrical thing he'd ever done up until then. That's a little bit later, Bob, till that. I think you taught that. Did you say it at Radio City Music Hall?
I think that's at the Garden, Madison Square Garden.
Was he already there?
Do you remember where
anyway,
these are from? Wow.
Anyway.
I can tell CBGB's from Max's,
well, when I
but
see
that's
the
about
picture,
it.
I remember where I was, what the view was.
Yeah.
There was no budget. There was zero budget. I can't remember. He said it to me one night. The next day, the thing was they were setting up for the gig, and they had these ladders up on stage. So for probably about 2.5 hours, I had access to that. And David was there, and the drums were there, and the instruments. And but there was only this wonky little. It was on a podium, and you could play a single on it, but it was a bit wonky, and you couldn't. It wasn't. The sound was drifting a bit here and there. Anyway, I shot some. I didn't. I got an assistant cameraman. Actually, it was a girlfriend of my ex-wife, Sheila, and she had a husband who was an assistant cameraman. But not that it required, a fucking ace to shoot what we did. It was basically still shots, but of course, and I had to juggle with it on the edit, because and some shots got put out and some got put in, just to make the sync work. And actually now I look at it, and sometimes I can see the sync slipping a bit.
How long from the time you shot that night did you have a finished product?
Well,
and did you put
by
it
the
out there?
standards of the time, it turns out pretty quickly. I shot the stuff one day, probably got it back the next evening, but because the single was ready to roll.
Right.
I mean, there was an urgency to it, but I don't know what the fuck we ever did with it. I think it was just before Was it just before we came to? Yes, it would have been the last big gig in England before the American tour. And he, in those days, there was just a little gizmo that you ran the film through.
Right.
There wasn't even a steam there.
Right.
You could actually see, or you could play.
Yeah,
alternative.
microphone.
Oh, sorry about that. I keep forgetting this fucking thing. But sorry. I promised my wife to lay low on the bad language. Because, no. She threatened me. No, she threatened me with GBH, Sally. So I'll show you her one day. Oh yeah, I like that.
I'd like to move on.
But anyway, whatever. You've had enough of that.
So you
want life on Mars?
So what is it, about a week until you got a finished product?
What's that?
About a week until you got a finished.
No. But I turned it in. I kept this poor assistant editor up all night because we got in there for almost nothing.
Yeah.
And in the morning, it had an epileptic fit.
He did.
Anyway, I mean, I don't know if I did it.
You did it. Trust me, you did.
I
Trust
don't
me,
know.
Mick, you did
but he
it.
had a fucking we just about finished. I suppose he'd let go, and he was sick to the teeth.
So how long did it take?
Less than probably one. Shot it one day, ding the next day. Oh, yeah, sorry, my hands move about a lot. Probably within 4 days.
Okay, less than a week.
It wasn't.
Thank you,
half
Mick.
an hour later.
Thank you
it
for
wasn't
that.
half an hour later.
That very quick response.
Well, I thought you wanted a bit of colour.
Bob,
Well,
we'd like to go on to Bob now. Please.
Oh, look, no, that's
Please.
my art photography. Look, legs. That's, all right? I have done a lot of art photography, all right, lads? But we do not do public pornography like some photographers.
Bob, we'd like to move on to you now. Talking about rock and roll books, you guys have both done a numerous amount of books, and I was wondering if you wanted to talk about those images in those books and why they sell. if I remember the time when
They sell.
No,
People buy them.
I remember the time when rock and roll imagery was so powerful, just a photograph, because we didn't have music videos. You couldn't get music videos on your phone because we didn't have cell phones and all that. So magazines like Rock Scene and album covers and these images that these guys put out were so powerful and so simple. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, that's where the inspiration came from. You know, it's hard to imagine today where there's so much information literally available in your hand. That Rock Scene magazine was news. You know, back then Rolling Stone would put out a lot of, you know, when they came out, they started around 1970 or so, had a 6-week lead time, which means that the deadline, whenever the deadline was, that magazine wouldn't actually be on the stands for 6 weeks. And that was kind of news, but Rolling Stone actually had the opinion that if you couldn't actually get the record, like didn't want to tell people about things that they couldn't actually find. Whereas with Rock Scene magazine, we felt if we found them, other people should know about them. Now, Rock Scene had almost a 3-month lead time. So by the time I would turn something in, it would take them 3 months to do it, you know, get it together, print it, and distribute it. But since we were doing such new bands, it was still news. You know, and people told me and also you had to search for it. It was sold in candy stores because it was published by the same kind of publisher that published, you know, Guns
Casper
and Ammo,
the Friendly Ghost.
and Casper comic books, and
Charlton
and Gardens, and those kind of Charlton publications.
Yeah.
So it wasn't on newsstands. You had to find a candy store that sold comic books, and then hope that the Rock Scene might be out, and because you never knew. It was 3-4 months later. People would go and look for it, and it wasn't there. They'd come back a couple of weeks later. But still, when you got it, 3 months later, that was news. You know, nowadays, if something happens before the singer's finished with the first song, it's all over the internet. So it's a different kind of news cycle today.
Well, when you go to a show now, it's just everyone holding up their camera phone. It's so bizarre. You know, because we're seeing the world through our phones, and I don't know what kind of...
Well, photography used to be complicated. You had to, first of all, carry a lot of equipment. You had to set the f-stops, the focal, you know, the speed. You had to know about the speed of the film. You had to, you know, calculate the light if you were using a flash. There was quite a bit of math involved and a lot of work. And then you'd have to go home and develop the film and then print the film and then send it out by mail or, you know, messenger or whatever. It took days and days to get the pictures to the magazine.
I was on the end of the Sex Pistols tour with Bob, which I'm not going to embarrass him with that other story.
Oh, good.
But Bob in Please Kill Me told me, he said the best line of his life. He picked up the phone and said,
After 10 days on the bus, I didn't know I was going on the tour. I thought I was going to see the Sex Pistols in New York, but unfortunately Sid had some visa problems, so it took a little while to get here, and they went straight to Atlanta. So I went there for one day overnight just to take some pictures and come home. I was saying goodbye to Malcolm when they were getting on the bus, and I said, I'm sure you'll have a great trip. Too bad I can't come along. And Malcolm said, well, you can't come, Bob, because we're only allowed 12 people on the bus, and there's the band and the guards. And so, well, that's only 11, Bob. Why don't you get on? So I ended up on this 10-day bus ride across America. And the embarrassing part is that Legs sent this pregnant teenager to my room on the last night. An old friend of mine, actually. It wasn't bad.
Demita.
Yeah. And I woke up the next morning, and I picked up the phone, and I called the concierge. I said, what time is the next plane to New York? And I took it, and I came home as soon as I could.
But the reason I brought this up was because you were home processing your film, and then you went to CBGB's.
Right. I spent 3 days in the darkroom while there was a blizzard outside, and then finally I had made all these pictures because they were the biggest news in America. The AP was there, the New York Times was there, LA Times was there.
Helicopters
all
were
kinds
following
of
you
people
guys
were
on the
coming
tour
around.
bus, right?
So this was a big world-class story. And I developed a lot of prints from it, 3 days in the darkroom, and then I went out, I walked all the way across Bleecker Street in the blizzard to go to CB's to have a drink and relax. And I walk in, and Johnny Rotten was sitting there with the other photographer. And I said, hello. He says, have you heard the news, mate? And he opens his T-shirt. We all got T-shirts at the end of the tour that said, I survived the Sex Pistols tour. And he had written on his, but the band didn't. and I said to him, well, what the hell does that mean? And he said, well, we broke up, mate. And I said, what do you mean you broke up? They were like the biggest band in the world that day. And he said, nope, we broke up. And, literally, those pictures went into a bottom drawer in my files because for 6 years, nobody called me about the Sex Pistols. And it wasn't until Alex Cox made Sid and Nancy, and Gary Oldham gave Sid an incredibly good personality, and then Sid became famous. And nobody knows really what Sid looks like or acts like because there's about 2 videos of Sid where he's nodding out and saying almost nothing. But Gary Oldham gave Sid a personality that he really became the punk hero. And it's not Sid Vicious, it's Gary Oldham. And I got to tell him that last year.
Yes, I know, yeah.
I got to thank him because I've sold a lot of Sid Vicious pictures thanks to Gary Oldham.
Sid was an idiot. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Mick,
He was a good actor.
It's been because I grew up in my early days were a completely different environment, So, I mean, it happened for me in a completely different way, in a more British way, shall we say. I'm really after Sid, the first significant person on the shot was actually Rory Gallagher, believe it or not. I mean, I'd shot some other album covers. I'd shot gave a couple, 2 or 3 jazz ones. I'd shot a couple of experimental things. But David Bowie, of course, when I met Madame.
How did you meet David and become friends with him?
Well, I had caught a glimpse of him. It was the Hunky Dory album. In fact, it was Felix Denix, who was still working for Oz. Do you know Oz?
Yes.
You know all about Felix. I mean, these guys might not, but it's a very Australian thing that happened in England.
Yes.
And of course, the Trials of Oz. There was all kinds of stuff going.
Oz was a big underground newspaper that got busted and caused a big stir in the UK in the late 60s.
They got sued. There was a whole trial. But I had, for some reason, the dark room I got access to was in their building. And Felix, who was the youngest one of the 3, seemed to actually be these were the later days of Oz, seemed to be the only one that actually showed up every day.
Yeah.
And of course, we know what a huge publishing he became. But anyway, on his desk, he would have, there were these records, and they used to punch holes in them because they were promotional copies, and they didn't want you going out selling them. Well, guess what? You could sell them anyway, because the record was the same. But that was the idea, and amongst them, there were several I took, but I cannot remember the others, was fucking Hunky Dory.
Hunky Dory.
And that fucking album, and of course, he looked different. And when I heard the lyrics, and then Life on Mars was the one I played about 50 times, and the next day I had to go and buy a new one because I'd fucked the free one up, you know.
Wow.
So it was, but that album did change a lot of things for me. And of course, on the back of it, because I had already done a couple of little pieces, written pieces on. I used to write as well a bit, grab a bit of extra cash, write the thing, do the pictures. And I'd done one on Syd Barrett for Rolling Stone. I was a magazine in England called Club International, which was basically a lot of young ladies prancing about
naked,
with very little on.
Yes.
And my friend was the art director there, and he said, well, they're looking for the front section to have a bit more interesting stuff in it. And that must have been right in early 72. And I did shoot a number of things for them subsequently.
But how did you become...
the first thing I did, and that Bowie shot in the fucking mirror, the first place that was published, which of course is now a classic, whatever the
But
fuck
did you just call up Main Man and say, hi, I'm a rock photographer and I want to shoot him?
No.
How did it happen?
Somehow I got hold of, I must have found a way to get to a publicist. Not that I was very acquainted in that way. I can't remember the move, but I do remember Anya Wilson, who was the blonde plugger. And we should say no more about that, but she was a lovely girl. And she was very entertaining, but she was a nice person too. I mean, stop all. What you?
I think there's an inside joke going on here between Ms. Ronson and Mick Rock.
Well, I have known Susie about 3 years.
Yes.
You've got to remember. So 4. Okay, 4. Let's own up.
So
You want something intelligent? I know.
So what was your?
He's very intelligent.
What was
you think
your?
he was the one that went to fucking Cambridge?
What was your relationship like with David Bowie?
Well, it was like instant. It was instant. One is, he was so articulate, and I shot. Look, who the fuck is that? Where the fuck are you, Jack? That is one of my all-time favourite pictures, especially because you're pulling your nipples. So, enough said, mother. So, no, in that I shot him performing. I went back. The very first pictures I took of him were backstage before Birmingham Town Hall in very early March. He wasn't that well known. There were about 400 people there. He did have a cult following of some sort, but I really didn't. I mean, I was aware that Space Oddity had come out, and I think had been like a gimmick hit in England and Italy in '69. And he actually, De Vries, the arch nemesis, when he got a hold of David, I think on
Tony
one
De
side,
Vries, the manager.
One side he had Hunky Dory, and on the other side he had Dana Gillespie, and whom you may recall, sporting girl with a very great voice and rather well endowed in the upper portion of her body. Anyway, that was Dana Gillespie. But back to David Bowie, he had to come to New York to get a deal for David because no one would give him a deal. I mean, in a way, I always see that relationship in that other circle between David, Lou and Iggy, because none of them, and Mott the Hoople, none of them, they had all been dropped by their labels when it started to come to... Well, Iggy, it took a bit longer, even though he'd made the classics already. But they all were in that throes. And Lou...
Basically, to sum
dogs
this
wouldn't
up...
piss on the Velvets.
Tony Freese came over and signed David Bowie to RCA, and they got a big advance, and they got big advances in cash, and they had not sold any records.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing at all.
That's the way it used to be done.
Oh, he had bodyguards, he had the whole... He didn't need bodyguards, but he had them. Yeah, well, yeah, there's another gentleman in the audience who may recall it.
No, not a very big advance at all. Oh, no? It wasn't.
No, well,
Oh,
not
okay.
especially after what De Vries had taken his bit, yeah. He used to say to me, David and I are 50-50 and he pays all the expenses. I mean, he would say, I suppose he thought I was like the village idiot. I mean, what did I know? I knew nothing about the business and that other side, which is actually quite fascinating, the slightly darker side, where all the,
Thank you for that, Mick.
Sorry,
we're going to
about
move
that.
on.
Sorry, we need to get back to Bob and a little bit of art.
We're going to move on to Bob.
Bob, give us some art, for God's sake. Let's stop
Bob, this is always a fascinating story to me.
Look, now there's Sid.
Shut the fuck up.
Okay, yes, sir. No, I did say it was all right.
Shut the fuck up.
All right.
Bob?
Yeah.
Let's just enjoy this moment.
I'm still here, yeah.
Bob, it always fascinated me how you got together with John Lennon. Can you? And I've asked you this story, and I've known it for years, but it's so
Existential.
no, it's so incredible. You know, I mean, and it shows you kind of how you guys can do it now. If you well, tell us a story.
Well, yeah, people are always asking, how did you get started and things like that, but I have a lot of patience. And actually, you know, I was always a huge fan. I mean, everybody likes the Beatles. I actually like the Rolling Stones better. But then when John and Yoko got together, I really thought that John and Yoko were fascinating. And the fact that they were working for peace and they were making statements about, you know, anti-war, returning the MBE, sending acorns to every leader of the world so that the world could grow together. Kind of cartoonish, and you know, they used to say they were the Marx Brothers for peace, that they would do humorous things to get attention, but it always was for peace. And so I was a big admirer, and then I heard, of course, everybody heard that they came to New York and they were seen riding bicycles in the village, and I live in the village, and pretty soon we heard that they were actually living around the corner from me. But you know, in New York, you don't go and bother people. But I was hoping to meet them, but I didn't, until finally they played at a benefit at the Apollo Theater, and I went not having any idea that John and Yoko would be there. I went because Aretha Franklin was there, and on the way out, they were waiting for the car, and people were taking snapshots of them, and I took a couple of pictures, and at one point John sort of said, everybody's always taking our picture, we never get to see these, you know, what happens to them? And so I spoke up, and I said, well, I live around the corner from you, I'll show you my pictures. And he said, oh, you live around the corner? We'll slip them under the door then, you know, kind of neighborly like. And I actually didn't slip them under the door, I rang the bell, and Jerry Rubin answered the door, which kind of freaked me out, you know, I wasn't expecting that. Like their doorman was Jerry Rubin, you know, like, you know. And but they were John and Yoko, you know. And so I left the pictures. He said, "Are they expecting you?" And I said, "No." And I left it. And years later, actually, Yoko mentioned that they were kind of surprised because everybody wanted something from them. And of course, I did, but I didn't ask. You know, I gave them something. And it wasn't until about 3 or 4 months later I was involved with a book, and the writer for the book liked my pictures, and he liked me, and he said, "Well, he's doing a story about the Elephants Memory Band that was." Being a backup band for John and Yoko in the studio, and he was going to interview John and Yoko, and would I come and take the pictures? And so I said, of course, yeah, I'd love to, you know. And I remember they were actually in a hotel doing interviews, and I met him there, and he met me in the lobby, and I remember he said that John and Yoko just woke up, and they weren't expecting a photographer, and but don't worry, just relax a little, they'll feel a little better, they'll have some coffee, they'll let you come up, they'll probably like your pictures and like you, and you'll probably become friends with them and do album covers. And I remember him saying that, because that's what happened, you know. And yeah. So I remember going upstairs when they said it was okay, like half hour later, walking down the hall shaking because I was going to meet John and Yoko. And I realized I couldn't take pictures shaking like that. And I just stopped. I took a breath. I realized I had a good life. It could get better if I met them, but I just had to be myself and hope that they liked what I did. And that's what happened. I took some good pictures. They liked them. I actually asked if I could come to the studio with them to get a picture of them together with the Elephant's Memory. And they said, okay. At the end of the night, they posed for some pictures. A few weeks later, because I had no idea they would need my pictures, they were John and Yoko. I actually went off on the road with Ike and Tina Turner. And I came back a couple weeks later, accidentally ran into the drummer, and he said, oh man, we've been trying to find you. You're the only one who has pictures, you know, that we like of us together with John and Yoko. We want to put them in the album cover. And that's when he brought me to their house. And that was the first afternoon we spent talking and smoking and having a good time together. And at the end of the day, Yoko came over and said that they liked me and my pictures, and they wanted to always stay in touch. And I'm still in touch with Yoko today. In fact, a year and a half ago, for her 80th birthday, I put together a book which was 40 years of pictures of Yoko, her public and private, with John, with Sean, in her art shows. And it was a personal, private gift just for her, with no commercial intention. But hopefully a lot of potential, because she asked us to publish it, and it'll be out in February. It's called See Here Yoko, and it's my next book that'll be out.
I'd like to just stay with, I'd like to just stay with you, because anybody who's in the room who's been to Bob Gruen's house, he lives in Westbeth. And it's very kind of screwy.
As an artist housing project in the West Village.
It's an artist housing project in the West Village. And to get to Bob's apartment, you have to take an elevator up to like the 4th floor, and then get on an elevator and go down.
You have to walk through the building and come down.
So it's kind of tricky to get to Bob's apartment.
We're on a little hidden cul-de-sac.
On a little hidden cul-de-sac. Now, the first...
Yeah, but the rent's cheap, right?
The rent is very cheap, that's why we're still there.
But the first person to visit Bob.
Oh, in that apartment was
and
John
this
Lennon.
was John Lennon. And can you? I love this story. It's really kind
Well,
of
we
fun.
actually we had an apartment downstairs, which was right next to the front door. And when they were at Bank Street around the corner, they came by a couple of times to watch videos or to use the machine the video machine we had. And then the weekend I was moving upstairs. Actually, John called me Friday night, and we were in the process of moving. And he said that he had actually was back with Yoko, hadn't been drinking for a while, but Harry Nilsson was in town. And he wanted me to meet him because he had to go out with Harry, and I knew all the doormen and clubs. And so I said, I'll meet you at Ashley's, but I had to finish some things first. And by the time I got there, he had just left, and they'd gone up to Trax. So I went up to Trax on 72nd Street, and I got there, and they had just left. Because whenever you get to a club, within 20 minutes, they would be so surrounded by people that they would leave and go to the next place. They went to JP's over on the east side. So I went there, and they had just left. So I said, fuck this, I'm not following them all night. I went back home. Finished moving all weekend, and Sunday afternoon he called me and said he was in the neighborhood. He wanted to stop by and just have some coffee before he went home. And I remember saying, well, I moved to a new apartment. It's kind of hard to find. Buzz me when you get here, and I'll show you how to get up. And about half an hour later, so he still wasn't there, and I was walking across the apartment to ask the doorman if he had seen some English guy come in. And John came breezing into the apartment. And he said, man, you got some crazy neighbors. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I've been ringing doorbells trying to find your apartment. Now, this is Sunday afternoon in early July. Everybody in the building is some kind of artist. And here's John Lennon ringing their doorbell at 4 in the afternoon. And they all said, well, let me show you my paintings. Let me show you my new poem. I just wrote a song. I've got this sculpture. Everybody has something to show them. So I'm still pretty famous in the building for that.
Now we're going back to Mick Rock.
Oh, no. Sorry to bore you out there. I'm sorry.
Mick, you've done a book.
Alice. Yeah.
You did a book.
What?
Alice. Yeah. Why don't you? What?
Look, fucking Carly. I got her to rip up backdrop and spit drinks at me, man, which the record company thought was very dodgy.
You did a book called Psychedelic Renegades.
Oh yeah, we're back to Sid.
Yeah, which is kind of it's kind of a punk term. I mean, you're almost evolving.
The thing is, am I a punk or am I a puff? It's a bit of a question mark. He definitely veers over towards the punkish element, I would say. Me, I straddle it, I didn't mean to, because it's very difficult on the testicles. However, sorry, I want to get sensible and give sensible answers.
I want to say the original title that Legs came up with for this show was Uncensored and Exposed, but we decided to keep it Eyes on Music.
Bob came up with Eyes on Music.
Photographers are so boring. Anyway.
We're not going to stand up here and expose ourselves just for the likes of you, all right?
How much does he get?
I'd like to say...
What do you want to know? What are you looking for? Spit it out. I know how he answers.
Thank you, Howie Pyro.
That's the punk in the audience.
Can we introduce two special guests tonight?
We have to.
You know what? The DJ never really gets the applause he needs.
No, fuck him.
I'd like to bring up our two other distinguished guests tonight, Mr. Howie Pyro.
Howie Pyro.
And from the Rockettes, Mr. Smutty Smith.
Oh, Smutty, you cunt. Come on up here.
You can tell which one's the rockabilly guy.
Join in the conversation.
Come here, Smutty.
Go, Mike.
No, I want Smutty. No, we haven't seen each other in a while. All right.
Smutty's been organizing our exhibits.
I want. No.
Who's sitting on whose lap, Mick?
Come on, share. All right. Who's taking pictures? You cunt. I don't know your name, but I want one. All right. All right. Okay. Sorry about the language in England. It's not so offensive.
Trousers down, six of the best, Mick.
Not again.
And some people pay good money for that.
Yeah, I know, but that's not exactly what I was into.
No, it's really an honour to be here tonight with Mick
questions.
and Bob.
Oh, we love. What was that all about? Mick, suck my dick? Who the fuck is that from? Is that from Bob? Does he want you to suck dick as well?
No, I'm supposed to blow him.
Oh, okay. I think that's the same thing, more or less.
Oh, well.
That's from Peter Crowley,
Then it's not going to happen.
Who's that from? Where is
I
he?
actually wrote my questions out
I want to see yours.
cue cards.
I want to see yours.
No, you won't be able to read them. They're my notes to myself.
I wanted to see. Didn't you get one of them?
But we'd like to thank everyone for coming.
Yeah, really good.
And it was really a lot of fun.
Are we going to take questions?
Lex McNeil, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Lex McNeil.
Don't leave.
Lex McNeil, man.
Howie Pyro.
Oh, man.
Bob, the one and only Bob Gruen.
Yeah, thank God.
The one and only Mick Rock.
Are we going to take questions from the audience? Are we taking questions from the audience? We're taking questions from the audience.
Yeah, we're going to
Stay
take some
here,
questions.
stay
So
Stay
go
here.
ahead. You obviously all came, big same reason I came here. I've known these guys since, well, Howie, Blessed, Heartbreakers,
No,
Johnny
I'm not
Thunders,
fucking
Maxi,
blessing him.
CBs. These are rock and roll legend photographers. There is nobody else in the world as big as these two guys right here.
He's good on that. He was always good with the
They
heart.
paid me to say that, but I'm saying it anyway. So questions and answers for Mick and Bob.
Here's the microphone.
And we're going to London next week. We're having the first show in London with Bob for a long time. We've got Waterloo playing. We got,
allow me.
Got members of the Sex Pistols and the Clash and a few other bands playing.
I
gotta
need
show
to
on
say
now.
it and get, because it'll take 1 minute, and then you can carry on about it. Because if I don't, I'm going to forget. I have an exhibition at Sumo Gallery at 37 Walker Street, just round the corner from the Tribeca Grand, and you need to go and take a look. Why the fuck not? I mean, I can't think of a good reason, but why the
It's
fuck
actually
not?
a really good
Now
show.
back
He's got
to
a lot of
London.
new work.
Back to enough, and it's up till October the 19th. And if you go around the corner, there's a very charming lady called Charlotte, and she can apprise you of more details. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, I'm Smutty Smith.
more
I used
about
to know
London.
these guys. I lived in New York a very long time. I was in the Rockettes and a few other bands. Can we take some questions for the boys?
For the girls.
For the boys and the girls. Who's got a question for Mick? What's your name, love?
She wants to ask Bob. Or it could be both of us.
For both of you guys, your personal favorite shot. Like, not the popular shot, personal favorite shot.
Yeah, for me it depends on the time of the year, the day of the week, and whether or not I'm having my period. That has a big effect.
Yeah, you know, people make lists. I don't make lists like that. I like a lot of my pictures, and it's like
Yeah.
asking which one is your favorite child. You know, you can't make a list like that.
No, but today...
I get that
do
question all
have-
the time.
Bob,
I only like
what
one
is
of my
the-
kids,
no,
so only one of
so
them.
you have a favourite picture today? No, but he can have one today,
Yeah.
and tomorrow can be different.
I have a lot of favorites. I put 500 of them in my
I know
book.
of one. He won't answer it. He's paying. No, I'm going to fucking give you an answer. Do you want an answer? Yeah, it's a shot of Sid Barrett, less known. He looks, I called it indecision. And he's looking, it's a black and white shot. Hasn't really been in any of my exhibit, but it's a very contemplative shot, and it was taken at that magic point after he'd left Pink
Who's the
Floyd.
girl with the lovely arse in the Sid Barrett shots?
I'm not telling you her name, you dirty little bugger.
I heard
Oh no, Iggy the Eskimo. Iggy.
I heard
Iggy
she
the
was just a
Eskimo.
roommate and she was in the picture. She
No,
wasn't
she
even meant to
was.
be there.
No, well, she was a roommate in the sense that it was late hippie days. But there was a lot of shagging going on. I mean, don't let us mislead the public about such things.
Another question.
Question.
Anybody else for a question?
Sure.
For me?
Yeah, I got a question for you guys.
Your turn.
It's hey Smutty over here,
Okay, where are you?
right over here. Jen and Xavier over here. Hi.
He's got a very deep
I see you.
voice.
I see you.
Hello, my friend. What's the picture that each of you can think of that changed it for you, where you went, yeah, I can do it? The first picture
Well,
you saw
for me-
back
for me
that
it was
really made you think you could do that.
I think it was the Sid. I had shot a couple of other people. I remember there was a band called Heir Apparent who had actually just come off a tour with Jimi Hendrix in America, and they were managed by Chaz Chandler, who was Hendrix's manager and producer. And there was another couple of bands, and I don't know, I don't even look at those pictures, to be honest with you. But Sid, whom I had befriended while I was at Cambridge, he actually was from Cambridge, and
He died
Well-
in Cambridge, I think.
yeah, he did. No, he was definitely back. And actually, the last public gesture he made in his life was to co-sign some beautiful books of mine called Psychedelic Renegades. But
Shameless
I can't
self-promotion.
go on. There's no, we haven't got time.
Yeah, for me, it was because in the 60s, I had taken some pictures of the glitter house that I was living in, and I was learning that I could actually take a good group shot. But I took the picture of Tina Turner, the multiple image one, which is actually one exposure while the strobe light was flashing, and just captured so much energy and power. And I remember seeing it develop in the tray and realizing, like, holy shit, I've really got
Richard,
something
this one's
special
for
here.
you.
Yeah.
Go on, this
Like,
one's for you.
That was special.
I want to thank you all for coming down. I want to thank the Ace.
Yeah,
Stick
now
around
fuck
for
off.
Howie
Okay,
Pyro.
thanks for being
fuck
here.
It's been a great. Give a big hand for our guest tonight.
And Howie's going to be playing all
Thank
night.
you, everybody.
And
Thank
the
you.
Smutty, the man who actually enabled this to happen, is standing here, and it's Smutty.
Thank you to Smutty
fucking
for putting this
Smith.
all together.
So thank you, Smutty.
And thank you to Alex for and Ace Hotel for
Big
having
hand
us.
for Bob. Big hand for Mick. Thank you all so much. Stick around for Howie Pyro.
And
Wow,
Greg.
you're still good at this shit.
And a big hand for Greg,
Yes,
orchestrated
thank you,
all
Greg,
with
for
the Ace.
organizing everything.
He ran off immediately. He couldn't wait to get away from us.
Stick around.